Big question, is the nightmare over? Is Anthony Rendon Anthony Rendon with the Angels?
You are Locked On Angels, your daily Los Angeles Angels podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and the #1 sports podcast network in all the land. Now, the Angels and Anthony Rendon are reportedly working on a buyout, so how will this impact the 2026 Angels? Why is this move so necessary? And what would we say to Arte Moreno about future big money moves? We'll discuss all of that today. Before we get there, we want to thank our sponsor, Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase.
Thanks for being here for this episode of Locked On Angels, where it's your team every day. You've got the Frisch brothers here with you, a.k.a. the Super Halo Bros. My name is Jon, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother Jon.
Hey, it's the off season here at Locked On Angels, and of course in MLB as well, but there's plenty of news about the Angels Monday through Friday. We're here talking about it. Now, I know this news broke about Anthony Rendon on Wednesday. Mike, it turned out that it was moving day for me and my family, and it was the holidays.
Yeah.
It was Thanksgiving holiday, so there was just a lot going on, but we knew that we would get to this conversation eventually, and we're glad you're here for it, talking Angels baseball with us as well. Let's get into the details from what broke regarding Anthony Rendon possibly retiring, Mike.
Yeah, there's all sorts of details unfolding as of this recording. Things will get updated, I think, as we get closer probably to the winter meetings, and I'm sure that we'll hear some more information this week. Now, reports from multiple sources say that the Angels and Anthony Rendon, they're working towards some sort of agreement that would end his time on the roster before the 2026 season starts and put an end to his $245 million contract. It seemed like the Angels had already planned on moving forward without him. General Manager Perry Minasian said that finding an everyday third baseman was one of his goals this offseason. Even though Anthony is under contract, we know about his injuries, we know about his issues. It makes sense why Perry would say that. And then Alden Gonzalez reported that Rendon is owed $38 million in 2026. Mm-hmm. The buyout of that remaining money has not been finalized, but they're working towards it, and it's a bit complicated. The expectation is that Rendon will defer at least part of the money, giving the team more financial flexibility to address needs this offseason. Now, keep that in mind. Jeff Fletcher reported that the present-day value of the contract can't be reduced, right, meaning that the luxury tax number can't be reduced. He also added that the Players Association doesn't allow players to give back value to the team. Now, Rendon could defer some of that money, which could free up salary space in the short term. But initially, Jon, it sounds like it could potentially give the Angels some financial flexibility, but not luxury tax flexibility. Is that how you're hearing it and reading it as well?
So everybody's discussing it as if he's going to defer money, probably not even expect to play this season. But here's the thing. Once he's retired, it is no longer an active contract. So what everybody's discussing is it's the last year of his deal. He could defer some of it to next year when he's not on the roster. But that is a non-retirement situation. Mm-hmm. If he retires, Mike, they still owe him the $38.5 million he's owed in 2026. Now, the average annual value of his contract over the 7 years, each year was worth $35 million. That's what counts toward the luxury tax. So I'll try to explain this as clear as I possibly can. He's owed $38.5. He's going to get his $38.5 one way or another, whether that's all this year or spread out over the next couple of years. I said on our quick reaction video last Wednesday that, let's round up to 40 and say over the next 8 years, the Angels will pay him $5 million a year. It could look something like that. It could be front loaded. It could be back loaded, right? But he would no longer be on the roster. The key here is if he retires and is no longer an active player, then that $35 million in luxury tax doesn't count towards the CBT anymore because he's no longer an active player. So I think that's the needle that we're threading here is one way or another, he's going to get what he's owed for this year, but the $35 million that was the average annual value that will not count toward the luxury tax in 2026. And the reason why we're discussing that so much is because Arte Moreno is constantly trying to avoid that first luxury tax threshold because then you have to pay a penalty when you go over that. He quickly went over it in 2023 when they made all those trades, and then they quickly got under it after the trade deadline by DFAing and having other teams pick up the players that they DFA'd, right? So that those monies came off the books, so to speak. Now, yes, he is going to get his 38.5, but how that's paid out, whether it's all this year or over the next few years, that's the negotiation. But the real crux of it all, Mike, is will Anthony Rendon actually retire? And if he does, he is no longer an active player, and that contract money will not count toward the luxury tax. It's very much like Chris Davis retiring when he did in 2021. Remember, the Orioles gave him a huge contract because he had that crazy good year. And then once he's retired, that money doesn't count toward the luxury tax. I mean, we joke about it all the time. Bobby Bonilla, the money he's still getting paid, doesn't count toward the luxury tax for the Mets because he is not an active member of the roster. So that's kind of how I can explain it the best that I can.
And that would make sense why the negotiations would be tricky, because it would mean that Anthony Rendon needs to retire from baseball.
Correct.
He needs to file his paperwork. He needs to make sure that MLB knows that he is all finished. Scott Boras said earlier this year about Rendon that he has a contract that he needs to fulfill. And so there was an obligation and kind of an attitude that he was going to be around in some capacity starting in the spring. Of course, he's had the surgeries and then the hip surgery, and he waited all off season to have the surgery and didn't play all this last year. Angels weren't counting on him being a part of the team in 2026. There's a lot of reasons for that. We'll get into that in segment 2, but that is the key, John. They have to negotiate in a way that gives them luxury tax flexibility, not just financial flexibility. And with our owner, we know that he wants financial flexibility, but I hope that Perry Minasian is a part of this conversation, and there's an understanding that you need luxury tax flexibility, because if you can knock off another $35 million from your luxury tax quota, that gives the Angels $60-70 million to play with after all of the arbitration contracts are fulfilled. And John, that's a lot of resource to go and get some really good players for this team in 2026. And that's going to be key for them to be competitive if that's the strategy for next year.
And here's the other part of the equation is that if Anthony Rendon doesn't retire, then Mike, he has to rehab in earnest for the team. Like if he's, still rehabbing from hip surgery or whatever's wrong, he has to rehab from that, which means being away from the family, taking the time out of your day to, do all the physical therapy you have to do, all of that stuff. And so at this point, it's almost like, well, then just retire.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, your priorities are your faith in your family before baseball. And if that's true, it would make sense for him to retire, because otherwise he's going to have to go through all the training. He's going to have to go through all the physical therapy. He's going to have to do all that stuff out of obligation to the team, and not obligation like, hey, you're getting paid $245. You need to be doing this for the team. It's contractually obligated obligation, right? And so I think that's the key difference here is, hey, dude, if you want out of this and you don't have to go through all of that for the next year, whether you play or not, you're still going to have to rehab in earnest. You're going to have to get whatever surgeries are required in earnest. And so to me, it just seems like it would make sense for him to call it a career at this point.
Yeah, and it feels like he hasn't done it in earnest, and especially with the last surgery. It feels like he waited, he put it on the back burner, and then decided to have surgery at a certain time. And it just feels like there's there's an exasperation when it comes to the front office, specifically with Anthony Rendon. Right or wrong, it feels like there is just we're tired of this. We're sick of this. He seems like he's sick of this as well. So it would make sense that he would retire. I can't see this guy wanting to continue to play. He's making a ton of money, made a ton of money for not playing very often. I mean, he signed a 7-year deal, John, $245 million. Here's the numbers. He played 257 games out of a possible 1,032 games.
Wow.
224 hits, just 22 home runs. Didn't hit a home run in the last season that he played in 2024. 125 RBIs, 10 stolen bases, and a 3.8 WAR. That's in 5 seasons where he actually was on the field. And then, of course, last year wasn't on the field at all. And then this year won't be there. I mean, this is an awful contract. We know it's an awful contract, and it would be wise, I think, of Anthony Rendon and the Angels to negotiate something that gives Anthony what he wants, and that is get out of baseball, be with his family, do what he needs to do, work with his church is what he said he wants to do. And then it gives the Angels the financial flexibility. But I'll come back to it again, John. It has to be luxury tax financial flexibility. It cannot be any other financial flexibility. You have to focus on that luxury tax number. And if you cannot do what you need to do with the luxury tax number, then I'm of the opinion that they just make Anthony Rendon do what he needs to do to continue to rehab. And I get that having him around is annoying, and what he might impact and how he might impact the team is annoying, but he's under contract and he needs to do his due diligence. And if you can't get luxury tax relief, then, or maybe you just send him home, right? And maybe you just don't come around anymore. We're just going to have you stay home, and we don't want you on the bench at all. But that's that would be my tipping point. That would be the thing that I would be working on, is how much can we get from the luxury tax number? How much can we take off of that so that I can go and spend this money somewhere else?
Well, and that's the other part of the equation is he's owed 38.5 this year. And again, if you pay him $5 million over the next 8 years or what have you, Mike, that's about $33 million in actual payroll money that's also freed up. So not only are you getting rid of that luxury tax, you've got about $33 million to play with to get yourself some other free agents. So I think that's a big part of the equation as well. Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. Coming up, what did Kevin Pillar have to say on foul territory about Anthony Rendon? Of course, he was, sort of in the clubhouse with Rendon. Pillar was here, Rendon was not, but they were part of the same team. He's got some interesting insights that we'll discuss coming up next.
NFL Sundays move very fast, and there's one play, and then suddenly everything feels different. It's so much fun to watch football. I love watching it live. I also love watching it on TV, and you're going to love watching it. And it's going to be even better when you watch it with FanDuel as a partner. It makes it really exciting for you. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. And with FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is the best way to get involved in the game and see how the game will shift along the way. Maybe a receiver gets hot, or defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump in on every moment and keeps you locked in on every snap, every drive, and every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and you can too.
This is the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network out there. Of course, we're happy to have you as an everydayer here on Locked On Angels. Be sure that if you're watching or listening, you come on over to YouTube, get in the comment section because we'd love to hear from you, and hit that subscribe button and like button while you're there as well. Hit us up on social media at Locked On Angels, at Super Halo Bros. We know you're going to have a lot to say because we're discussing Anthony Rendon and the contract and the possibility of him retiring. Mike, Kevin Pillar said some really unfiltered things about Rendon on the Foul Territory podcast last week. First, he said Rendon is one of the most misunderstood players of all time. Here's what he had to say. The joy for a lot of players when you get to the major leagues, some of that is taken away from you he implied that this was just a job for Rendon and that the business side of baseball is draining. And then Pilar said that Rendon isn't a bad guy and that players would actually call him a friend.
Yeah, when you talk about baseball being a job, I know that all of us regular people doing regular jobs would say, oh, come on, you're playing a kid's game and you get to do it for a career. And, you got to know how blessed you are, how much of an opportunity this is. All of that's accurate. All of that's correct. However, there is a business side to it. And the business side is not always fun. And the travel is not always fun. And being away from your family is not always fun. And that is a part of the empathy that I would have for Anthony Rendon. I get that this is a difficult career to have in some aspects, but I also get what a privilege it is to be a professional baseball player.
Yeah.
And there are guys that have handled it well. I would say Mike Trout has handled it very well, very classy. You never hear anything negative from him. Even when he gets hurt, you can see how heartbroken he is, still has a family, still doing things outside of baseball, still raising kids. I'm sure that his wife has to carry a lot of the load, but he is somebody that I think has handled himself in a beautiful way. Rendon has not handled himself, at least in front of the media, in a beautiful way. And that's a piece I think that he probably doesn't enjoy at all. So I have great empathy for him being frustrated with a job, just like you and I and everydayers can be frustrated with our job. I do think, though, that what we've seen from an Anthony Rendon is somebody who hasn't been deeply committed to the career that he was putting forth before he signed with the Angels. And even then, it didn't feel like he was disconnected, but for some reason, after the 2020 season, and maybe it was the injuries that kind of caused that, it seemed like everything just went downhill for him.
Well, and when you are in a job where you are in a position where you have to get surgeries and it's kind of required of you, right? I mean, that's not fun to go through, even if, you and I and everydayers have had, minor surgeries, major surgeries, something like that. And it's not even part of the job. You're obligated to go through that stuff so that you can get back to the player that you're supposed to be. I mean, that's the balance of having a $245 million contract and signing it and then trying to live up to that. And when you can't live up to that and you get hurt, you got to go through the processes and the surgeries to help get you back to that $245 million guy. And he just never got back there. So on one hand, I totally get it. It sucks. He's had to go through a lot. And I think at the end of the day, his body has just betrayed him.
Yeah.
But as you alluded to, Mike, I think the attitude has just been super frustrating. I'm sure for the team, for us fans, it's been obviously frustrating. I think we're all kind of over it, ready to move past it. The best thing he could do for this team is to retire and work out a deal to where, they're not paying him so much money in this one season so that they can actually get some business done, get some things done. And I'll also say too, that I know a lot of people say, well, is this the worst contract in MLB? Well, maybe Steven Strasburg was the worst contract. They signed him at the same time with Rendon with the Angels, Strasburg with the Nationals. The thing about Strasburg, though, is at least from the outside looking in, maybe Nats fans have a better understanding of it. But Strasburg wasn't a jerk about it, right? And I think there became a point where Rendon just started to become a jerk about it. It's like, what the heck, dude? Like you're part of the team we root for, and you're starting to lose me. There was a period of time, Mike, where I think maybe even in our first season or maybe our first year just doing podcasting, we actually, like you said, we had the empathy for Rendon and saying, come on, give him a break, But there was definitely a turning point. I don't know if it was no habla inglés or what have you, but it was there was a period of time where it just the narrative got really bad around Rendon.
Which brings us to the next point that Kevin Pillar made. He spoke on why this move was necessary. He said to not have to deal with him being in spring training, maybe influencing some of the younger players to not go hard in drills, not take ground balls, or learn from him in maybe a negative way. I thought that was really interesting that he would bring that up, that maybe perhaps he's not going as hard as he should or not doing what is necessary. And then he added that people inside the clubhouse, the front office, and the ownership group believe Anthony Rendon didn't put forth his best effort every single day. And he added that when you sign a large deal, you owe it to the team to put your best foot forward. It feels like he didn't do that. And then when he was having to show up, the attitude on top of his not giving the best effort, I think made it even worse. And to not have him around this team, I don't know if he would impact and influence the team so that everybody would kind of lean in his direction. It sounds like they're friendly and might enjoy being around each other, but I can't see Anthony Rendon turning a Zach Neto or a Logan O'Hoppe or a Jo Adell or a Nolan Shonowell and causing them to kind of be lackadaisical about their job, although that isn't beyond something that could happen. And it's interesting. I find it interesting that Kevin Pillar, who was around Rendon a bit, makes those comments and really was kind of blunt about, like, this guy kind of was lazy and didn't really do what he was supposed to do. And the front office and the people in the clubhouse and the ownership group all believe that Rendon really didn't put his best foot forward every single day.
I mean, it's obvious, right? Now, I do have it on pretty good authority, somebody that we trust who's around the team, in the sense that they kind of know the ins and outs of the clubhouse. Like, Rendon was working hard to get back this season, but then he had to get the hip surgery and wasn't too upset that he was going to have to miss out on 2025. So it was a matter of like, hey, he's ramping up, he's getting ready to go, and then he had to have the surgery, and he was like, well, all right, fine, I'll just stay home. And that's kind of, isn't that the attitude, right? Like, that's the attitude that's really frustrating when it comes to Anthony Rendon. And so, again, with Mike Trout, the last 5 years have just gone terribly. And that's mostly because of the injuries and not being on the field. But every time he gets hurt, or every time he hasn't been able to be there, he's at least displayed to us and shown us the emotion behind it, that he hates it. He hates being out. He wants to be there with the guys. He wants to play this game. And isn't that the difference here? Is at least, like, you can have, again, that word empathy. At least you can have empathy and even sympathy for Mike Trout, who has displayed that and shown us that when he gets hurt, he cares and it bothers him. And with Rendon, over the last couple of years, any credibility, any empathy, or what have you, slowly slipped away. And that's a shame, really.
Well, and that's the last thing that Kevin Pillar talked about. He said that this move was long overdue, and it's unfortunate that the end of Anthony Rendon's career is going to be overshadow how talented of a player he once was. Now, what you just said could have changed the narrative for Anthony Rendon.
Right.
Mike Trout has been hurt, but Mike Trout is still looked at as a great human and a great player.
And a future Hall of Famer, like, no matter which way you look at it.
And we see somebody trying to get back on the field. We see a good attitude, at least in public, in front of the media. What we don't see from Anthony Rendon is a good attitude. What we see is the nonsense that he played into, and the no habla inglés, and putting a hoodie on and covering his head and not wanting to interact with the media, and then showing up at spring training and saying, hey, I got to have hip surgery, right? And we don't hear anything about him because I'm sure that general manager Perry Minasian in the front office is really frustrated with him. The narrative could have been different. It could have been very different. Would we have been frustrated as fans? Absolutely.
Yeah.
The injuries that Anthony Rendon has had to face are injuries that are just baseball injuries. And they were fluke things, like when he got hit in the leg on the 4th of July a few years ago, and it fractured his leg, and then there was a misdiagnosis, and then it ended up being a fracture. That's frustrating. And when he talked about it, that was helpful to hear his perspective. But it was also in that conversation, John, where he said he prioritizes his faith and his family over baseball, and everybody kind of jumped on that, including you and I. But we jumped on it because what we got from Rendon in that moment was not, hey, I'm working really hard to get back. And I also just want people to know, like, hey, I'm a really faithful guy, and I really want to honor my family. And it didn't come across like that at all. What it came across as is, if I get back, I get back. And if I play, I play. And we're like, dude, you're making $35 million.
Yeah.
And we need a third baseman. And this team is horrible. And we've been dealing with a lot of injuries. And the guy that's playing center field is weeping on camera because he wants to get back. And you're just kind of flippant about it. It didn't come across great. It was bad PR. The look was bad. And that's the problem. The problem is Anthony was the problem and his attitude was the problem. Yeah. If that was different, then I think the narrative would have been different.
Well, look, both Mike Trout and Rendon were phenomenal in the 2010s, and Mike Trout is destined for the Hall of Fame off of that track record alone. It doesn't matter what's happened in the last 5 years, but if Rendon had been talking the way that perhaps Trout has been talking, then people might still look at Rendon that same way too and go, man, he was really great in the 2010s. It's a real shame how things ended up for him in the 2020s. And but now there's this whole other element. There's this whole other issue of his attitude, his effort, and it's just at the end of the day robbing the Angels blind. Trust me, I don't have any sympathy for, billionaires who get to spend their money this way or whatever. But the fact is like they paid him to play this game, and he just clearly not put his best foot forward. And I think that you're going to have two different narratives, like Kevin Pillar said. You're going to have two different narratives about who Mike Trout was and has been and has become versus Rendon and who he was, has been, and has become.
The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams. There's going to be 48 teams in this tournament for the first time ever. It's going to be massive, and you can actually get tickets, but it could be hard to get tickets. That's why you need the Game Time app. They are coming in clutch for you, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment that they hit the app. Plus, it puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. Take all the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets, and every match and every concert or every event, every baseball event you go to, just take the guesswork out and use Game Time. Download the app today, create an account, use our promo code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Again, download the app, create an account, use our promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Swipe, tap, ticket, and go. Game Time.
So after this disaster of a contract, what would you say? What would I say? What would our everydayers say to Arte Moreno? Because here's why this conversation is necessary. Arte Moreno has said he spends money. Perry Minasian has said Arte and Carroll have always invested in this team. And when you look at the payroll, the Angels are usually somewhere in that top 10, that sort of thing. So it's not as if money has not been spent on this team. But this situation going south, obviously for Arte in his eyes, is probably a big check in the box for, well, I'm not going to spend big on free agents if this is how things are going to turn out. And I think that's the big caveat here is we would have things we want to say to Arte Moreno, and his answer will be, well, I did spend money, and look how it turned out. It turned out to be a disaster, because it was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, Mike, one of the first things I would say to him is, hey, you're not the only one this happens to, dude. Like, again, the same year that Strasburg and that Rendon signed his contract, Strasburg signed with the Nationals. And that was that. And he had to retire, right? So I think that's something that I would say to Arte Moreno right off the bat is, you're not the only one that this happens to. I know you've signed bad deals. You wanted Hamilton, right? And I know Pujols can look like a bad deal, but hey, the dude showed up for work when he was healthy. He was running on bum legs and plantar fasciitis and still averaging about 30 home runs a season, over the 9 years that he was here. And so, yeah, I mean, this is the nature of the game, isn't it, Mike?
Yeah, very much so. And he's not alone in this. This has happened to a lot of teams. There's a lot of conversations we could have about other teams and what they had to do. You mentioned Chris Davis. You mentioned Steven Strasburg. Those are just two of the many names. Bobby Bonilla was brought up. Three of the many names that these contracts didn't work out for the best. And then you had to figure out what you're going to do moving forward. What I would say to Arte Moreno is simply, Arte, give Perry Minasian a bigger sandbox to play in and stay out of the sandbox. You don't need to monitor it. You hired him for a reason. And the guy has shown to get some really good draft picks. And the guy has shown to work really well in your sandbox. I would love to see him work with a bigger sandbox and work with a little bit more of the financial flexibility that I know that you can bring. And I would let him do that. It's his last year. You have 1 year with Kurt Suzuki. Let's see what this team can do. So go and make the moves that this team can make and sign the players that they need to sign. I don't think you need to break the bank to make this team a whole lot better. But instead of going and getting the flashy superstar that you think is going to draw tickets and put butts in seats, instead go and get 3 or 4 players that are really going to help improve this team. Get a third baseman and get another starting pitcher. Maybe get 2 starting pitchers and then get a relief pitcher. Go and get a left-handed bat. You, again, don't need to break the bank. You're going to have to spend some money, but you don't need to spend the $245 million over 7-year deal with somebody like an Anthony Rendon. You can go and maybe do 3 years or 4 years with some of the players that are out there right now, because none of them are superstars, but they certainly are going to change the game if they signed in Anaheim.
Look, that's, I think, something that we can't gloss over. Rendon was a superstar.
Yeah.
When he signed.
Yeah.
And we needed a third baseman.
Yeah.
But the problem is that Garrett Cole signed with the Yankees, and Artie's pivot and his splashy free agent was Rendon. And look, I think this had the potential to be great for the Angels over the last 6-7 years, right? But with all the injuries that stacked up, it really just didn't work out. And again, we've discussed it, the attitude problems, all that stuff. That's all on top of what sucks about this contract. But at the end of the day, Mike, it wasn't a bad idea. It wasn't a bad move. It was frustrating because had you add a little more money to Garrett Cole's contract, you probably could have easily had him in Anaheim. And I know people will say, well, he was always a Yankee fan. Get out of here. Right. He would have been here if the Angels had given him more money than the Yankees did. And Garrett Cole didn't pitch this year.
Yeah.
And so is that a disaster? No, because he has led that team. He's been the ace of the staff. He's one of the few remaining, I think, true aces in the game. You know, Verlander and Scherzer were certainly those guys, but they're past their prime now, so they're not quite who they used to be. But I think Garrett Cole's one of the few, if not maybe the only ace in the game right now. Like that's kind of how I view it. And if you lose a year of Garrett Cole, is the contract a disaster? No, but he certainly would have been more helpful to this team because the team has always needed a new ace, a frontline starter, and you kind of have to sign, the middle of the road guys. You got to hope that Grayson Rodriguez is healthy enough and actually becomes, the number one prospect that he has always been, pegged to be. So that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day is you can't be afraid to make those big splashy free agent deals when they make sense.
Yes.
And they haven't always made sense, right?
Yes. Right. Absolutely. And that's the second thing I would say to Arte is we appreciated that you went and filled a need. We needed a third baseman in 2020, but the greater need was pitching. And there was an opportunity for you to get some good pitching, and you didn't pay the money to do that. So that's why you need to trust your baseball people. You need to trust Perry Minasian to go and fill the need that you actually need on this team. And getting superstars is great, but if you can get a couple of A-, B+ players, and it's going to help with the team that you have right now, because I think Zach Neto will be a superstar, and I think that Logan O'Hoppe has the potential to be that. I think Jo Adell has the potential to be that. You have a really good team here, and you should build on the really good team by getting some really good players, maybe 2, maybe 3 really good players instead of the splashy, this will put butts in seats kind of player.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. As the winter meetings are coming up soon. Hopefully they can have all of this sorted out so that Perry has that financial flexibility that we discussed in the first segment.
Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. Be sure to like and subscribe while you're here. It's the best way to stay updated on all things Angels throughout the offseason.
Hey, be sure you give us a follow at Locked On Angels on Twitter, at Super Halo Bros on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, whether you're watching or listening today. Find today's show on YouTube, get in the comments section because we want to hear your thoughts. What would you say to Arte Moreno about big free agent signings? If they make sense, they don't make sense. We want to hear what you would say to Arte. Mike, what do we have on deck when we come back on Tuesday?
Well, the Angels do need a third baseman, so should they trade for a proven third baseman? Should they sign a third baseman? What will be the Angels' way? The Halo Bros are going to give you the answer tomorrow on Locked On Angels.
All right, looking forward to that conversation. We hope you'll come back and join us for that. Until then, my name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
All right, for all you sickos who love this Angels team and the everydayers who love to watch and listen, we'll see you back here on Tuesday.
John and the new digs.
Hey.
The new studio.
It's getting there. It's getting there.